Okay, so thanks for being here. So I'm excited to be introducing Xiang Yang, who's a PhD student at the University of Tasmania, and is going to be talking about some of his work on carbon fluxes in the subantarctic zone, both from mooring data as well as BGC Argo data. So thanks very much, Xiang, and you can take it away.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Chenny. Hello, hi, everyone. I'm Xiang. Thanks for joining this webinar, and thanks, Chenny and the SOFLUX committee for inviting me to giving this talk. I am a third-year PhD at the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies, University of Tasmania. So working with Catherine Wei Edwards, Pete Stratton, and Elizabeth Sharwick. I want to thank them for their precious contribution to my research. So today's presentation is sort of a combination of the first two chapters of my PhD, and they are both focused on the carbon flux and the carbon cycle in the Australian sector of the Subantarctic Zone. So I would like to start with our motivation. So I have just screenshot this number yesterday or this morning. I can't remember. Until now, our atmospheric PCO2 is reaching to about 425 ppm, and it has increased about 1.3 ppm with compared to the same date in last year. So that is quite a problem to cause increasing global warming and thus induce more potential extreme events. And I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with this figure on the right. So the ocean is the biggest carbon pool by containing the carbon as dissolved in organic carbon, which is the DIC. And the Southern Ocean has responsible for nearly 25 to 40% of the global ocean carbon uptake, especially for the anthropogenic CO2. Therefore, to better understand the carbon features in this ocean is quite important, but it is relatively easier to keep track on the anthropogenic CO2 level because the atmosphere is well mixed. But to understand what's going on in this Southern Ocean is much more difficult. So one of the reasons is the quite limited observation number we have in this wild open ocean, especially before the BGC Argo program starts in 2015. So from this Samantha paper, there are only 1,000 ship observation in the Southern Ocean during 2010 to 2017. Therefore, we do need some platform to better observe the Southern Ocean, especially some method can extend the record to prior the BGC Argo era. Besides, there are more studies have shown that Southern Ocean carbon uptake have experienced a strange uptake period since the early 2000 to 2011. And the uptake strength was reversed after that. I guess what I'm trying to say here is besides focus on the seasonal variation or the fine scale events, we are longing for something to provide a long time series to help us to better understand the decadal variability and the changing trend of the Southern Ocean carbon uptake. So that's the reason why we choose SOFLUX to start this research. So SOFLUX stands for Southern Ocean Time Series. It is set at southwest of Tasmania, Indian Ocean sector. It will represent the water property in the wild range in the Subantarctic Zone, which is the range between the subtropical front and the subantarctic front, roughly between 46 to 60 degrees Celsius. And it is a globally significant region for uptake and the storage the anthropogenic CO2 from the atmosphere, because the subantarctic meltwater was formed and subducted here, just like this schematic shows. So with this water mass spreading to the north in the deep ocean, it is very likely to manipulate the global ocean carbon storage. Therefore, the source just give a great shot to understand the carbon cycle and its drivers in the subantarctic zone. Before I start my research, I would like to quick introduce the SOFLUX mooring to people who are not familiar with it. So SOFLUX is owned by the Australia Integrated Marine Observing System, which is IMAS, and it is consists of two deep mooring systems, just like this schematic shows here. So they are both anchoring at about 4,500-meter depth, and the SOF is the Southern Ocean Flux Station. So it is the surface float with a bunch of sensors that can record BGC parameters like PCO2, chlorophyll or oxygen concentration, and the particular organic the particular backscatter to at about 1 meter depth with the hourly frequency. So this recent study by Elizabeth just showed the high resolution of it. So it also have another group of sensor of BGC and trace metal at 30 and 50 meter depths respectively. So SOF was deployed in 2011. Despite there are some interruption or some gaps, it still provide a record of PLC in PCO2 in the past 10 years and provided nice year-round RC flux record, especially covered several years before the BGC Argo really deployed. So it is the longest and the only open ocean mooring in the Southern Ocean at this time. So there is another sediment trap mooring next to the south. Normally, there are 3 sediment traps placed on 1,000, 2,000, and 3,800 meter depths. So they collected particle in every 2 weeks, and it started in the late 90s. I think it's 1997. So as one of the largest Southern Ocean time series, this mooring system just gave a great chance to understand the upper ocean carbon uptake and the deep ocean carbon sequestration in the Subantarctic Zone. So based on the awesome platform, we did 2 studies. So one focused on the surface flux and another one focused on the organic carbon export in the deep ocean. So they are the first 2 chapters of my PhD. The first one is published on GBC and second one is submitted and currently under review. So for the first part, the drivers of air-sea CO2 flux in the Subantarctic Zone reviewed by the time series observation, we try to answer 3 key questions here. The first one is understand or characterize the surface PCO2 seasonal variability and the long-term changing trends in the South region. And second is try to quantify the air-sea CO2 flux in this region. And the final one just try to understand the driving mechanism of the surface PCO2 variability and try to attribute it to the large climate mode like SAM or local mesosphere processes. Just a bit introduction of SAM, the Southern Annular Mode. This is the most influential climate mode in the Southern Hemisphere, which is characterized by atmospheric mass moving between the mid and high latitude. So from the previous study, a positive SAM tends to drive the westerly wind to the south, and it is very likely to increase the Ackermann transport to move the water mass from the polar region to the north. So it will likely to impact the mixed layer depths and the sea surface temperature in the subantarctic zone. So that could potentially influence the carbon variability and the carbon flux, but to what extent is unknown. So the source record was chosen here. So, but just like the figure I showed before, there are some gaps in the time series, and it's only covered to 2011. So to extend and fill the gaps in the source PCO2 time series, we try to use some ancillary data to construct a multiple linear regression model, which called MLR. So chlorophyll concentration, sea surface temperature, wind speed, and mixed layer depth was used here, and they were selected within this box to represent the region where source belong to, and they were monthly average to keep the time resolution consistent. But before we putting them into the model, we have used the high accuracy in situ data from source and the voyage nearby to calibrate them. So in the right figure, those 4 parameters were scattered, and you can see they are equally distributed and nearly have 1-to-1 ratio to the calibration data. So we are pretty confident to use them to construct the model and use the PCO2 time series from source to train the MLR model. So our model has covered since January 2004 to the end of 2021, and that is defined by the ancillary data we used. And based on these 4 parameters, besides the 4 parameters I just mentioned, we have include time t as a parameter into the MLR. So that is aimed to account for the impact of increasing anthropogenic CO2. And in the right figure, the MLR output is plotted at the thick blue line and the source record is in green. So it looks like the MLR has captured most of the signal except some disagreement in 2015. And we did one more step to examine our model by comparing it to 3 PCO2 data set, glow depth, SOCART, and SOCOM. So for those data, we selected them in the same box, just like I mentioned before, and monthly averaged. Since the source mooring is also contributing data to SOCAT, we have manually removed it and only compare our MLR output to the ship and the float estimates. So comparing them together, we believe the MLR have a really good agreement with the validation data, especially with the shipboard measurements. It might lose some subseasonal signals, but this small difference could be led by the short duration event that the float or ship experienced. So we believe that this model can simulate the decadal growth trend and the seasonal cycle of the PCO2 very well. And the correlation test just strongly support this fact. So from the model output, we have found the surface PCO2 is minimum in the summer and the maximum in the winter, but it's always below the atmospheric PCO2 level, which in this thin black line here. And those vertical gray bar here just represent the productivity season, which is from October to February. And the average amplitude of the seasonal cycle is about 44 microatmosphere, and it varied from 30 to 60. And for both of the minimum and the maximum value, they have experienced quite an increase from by about 40 to 50 microatmosphere during this period. And we fitted the linear regression model through this blue line, and we find the surface PCO2 growth rate is about 2.8 microatmosphere per year. So this number is slightly larger than the atmospheric and the Central Pacific area. And to understand the drivers of the seasonal cycle, we try to separate the part of the PCO2 that only influenced by the thermal effect. Following this Takashi method, we call that PCO2T, which is the red line we plotted here. And so this mechanism is when the surface temperature change, it will influence the solubility of the carbon in the water. As for the rest part, the non-thermal part is plotted as green. So we found that this non-thermal part decreased in the productivity season and increased during the non-productivity season. So it is mainly influenced by the biological uptake or the movement of the carbon-rich water mass. Therefore, we call that PCO2 non-thermal or non-T. So photosynthesis decreased surface PCO2 since the productivity season starts, and in the meantime, the warmer water mass lose the capability of CO2 to increase the partial pressure of CO2. So these two parts are opposite and offset each other. But you can see here the biological part has contributed 3 or 4 times larger than the thermal part. So that makes the source region biologically controlled. So one of the reasons to cause this is the seasonal change of the sea surface temperature in the source region is just between 9 to 13 degrees. So the thermal effect is really, really low here. And based on the PCO2 time series, we have tried to quantify the air-sea CO2 flux, which is FCO2. We believe that the source region plays as a net carbon sink throughout the 2 decades with a magnitude of 4.8 millimole per square meter per day. So this is the monthly average value, and by compare with the previous border observation, we believe this region is one of the largest carbon sink or strongest carbon sink in the Indian sector Southern Ocean. It is also a mid-level strong carbon sink around the world, just a little bit less than the crucial region. And we acknowledge that our model may neglect some short outgassing event in the winter time, but Elizabeth's recent study just showed the monthly mean value of the salts record may also stay below the atmospheric level. So we believe that our estimate is quite representative. And after the characterization, we just try to use a correlation test to understand how does the SAM influence this region and in what extent. Here I have listed all the significant results with the positive SAM, and all the correlation tests were done by the time series that being removed seasonality and the long-term growth trend, and we call that anomalies. So the positive SAM tends to enhance the wind speed with no time lag, and the stronger wind directly increase the surface ocean carbon uptake from the air because the seawater PCO2 is always lower. And the positive SAM always likely to deepen the mixed layer with one month lag. And besides the wind, we didn't detect any co-occurring temperature or salinity anomalies with the mixed layer deepening. So we suggest the Ekman transport is not the reason to drive the mixed layer deepen, but the wind mixing is. For the PCO2 variability part, the SAM tends to increase the surface PCO2 with 4 months lag, and it is mostly contributed by the non-thermal part. For now, we can't explain why the SAM positively increased the PCO2 non-T through the correlation test. That is probably because the PCO2 variability is impacted by more than one drivers and they are active in different seasons. So to understand that, we try to investigate the relationship between the anomalies of PCO2, non-thermal, and other parameters. So let's focus on the impact of ocean productivity first. We use chlorophyll concentration as a proxy of it. So in the first panel, just like I mentioned before, the ocean productivity decreased the PCO2 significantly in the productivity season, and the relationship was totally broke down in the autumn and the winter. So that suggests the chlorophyll concentration cannot be the good proxy for biological activity, just like the respiration outside the summer. But in the left bottom corner panel, we found that the PCO2 non-thermal is negatively correlated to the sea surface temperature, which might suggest the cold carbon-rich water mass movement is very likely to be the reason to increase the PCO2 non-thermal. And we didn't find any obvious relationship between the anomalies of PCO2 non-thermal and the mixed layer or the surface salinity. So it seems like the local mesoscale process will driven the deep mixing or the horizontal advection to impact the carbon concentration. Therefore, we use a group of case study to investigate how does the mesoscale process like subtropical front movement and the eddy activity impact the local hydrology and the carbon features. So as the figure shows here, we use some satellite image and the time series anomaly to identify the mesoscale process and its impact. In general, these two mesoscale processes are both likely to enhance the water mass movement from north to south, and that is moving the warmer water and the saltier water with less carbon in the subtropical zone to the south region. So we use temperature and salinity anomalies to identify the water mass source. For example, let's focus on the blue line here. So this is the time series of 2009 and 2010. So the number of months are plotted along the x-axis, so 24 months is in total. And the anomaly of each parameter are in y-axis. So temperature and salinity in the upper row and the PCO2 and the frontal location in the lower row. In the 2009, which is the first year, this region is in cold and the fresh event, which is indicated by the negative anomalies. And in the meantime, the subtropical front is quite north away. So these two black dash lines just indicate the north and the south boundary of the south box. So in this year, the subtropical front didn't pass through the south box, and the PCO2 non-thermal is close to zero and in the positive anomaly. But in the next year, when the subtropical front moving back to the south region, it directly changed the region become warmer and saltier with less carbon. So the eddy activity is it's very similar to the frontal movement. We believe the eddy trapping mechanism is played a dominant role here. So in the figure here, there's a bunch of cyclone and anticyclone eddy were found in July 2015 and June 2019. And these two periods are the most representative periods. So both of them corresponded to warmer and saltier event with negative surface PCO2 anomaly that implies the north subtropical water was transported to the south region. Well, here I just give a quick glimpse of this case study, but if you're interested, please feel free to talk to me later. So just a quick summary for the chapter 1. So in this study, we use the SOS PCO2 time series to construct a multiple linear regression model to fill and extend the record for nearly 20 years. And based on that, we found that the surface PCO2 variability was mainly controlled by the biological or the non-thermal part. And it is growing at a rate of 2.8 microatmosphere per year. But in the last 2 decades, this region plays as a net carbon sink. And for the drivers of the variability, the positive SEM can slightly enhance the carbon uptake but impact the wind. And the local internal variability is largely influenced by the primary productivity and the mesoscale processes. So in the first chapter, we find that this region have a very strong biological carbon drawdown in the summer, but we don't know how much biological organic carbon have been produced and exported to the depths. So this become our main topic in our second chapter. So it is quite necessary to understand the particular organic carbon export, since the POC is the most important food resources for the ecosystem in the Mesopelagic Ocean. For the part that survival from the remineralization, it will be sequestrated to the deep ocean for hundreds and thousands of years. So it has contributed quite a lot to storing the atmospheric CO2. And to better understand and quantify this carbon sequestration pathway will help us to better build the knowledge of global carbon budget. So the organic carbon export is driven by multiple pathways, such as gravitational sinking or mixing pump or the biological migration. And this review paper by Philip Boyd just summarized them very well. And in our research, we just mainly focused on the first 3 carbon pump, which is biological gravitational pump, the mixed layer pump, and the anti-subduction pump. So in this chapter, we have combined the group of BGC Argo fleet observation and the sediment trap flux from the South Marine to address these three key questions. The first one is quantifying the POC export by these 3 pumps and understand their seasonal variability. And then we try to compare those estimates to the sediment trap record and to quantify the transfer efficiency at about 1,000 meters and try to understand each pump's contribution to the deep sea carbon sequestration. And finally, we just try to explore a possibility to extrapolate this method to a large oceanic zone. Here, I just give a brief introduction of these 3 carbon pumps. So the first one is biological gravitational pump. Just like the name suggests, it consists of large particle fast gravitational sinking, especially in the spring and the summer when the primary productivity increase, it will become the key link to transport those large organic carbon from the surface to the depths. But more and more studies have raised the question about the discrepancy between the amount of carbon that export from the surface with the amount of carbon that the ecosystem requires in the mid-ocean. So more carbon pathway are needed to fill this gap. The mixed layer pump is mostly transport the small slow sinking particles. During the wind deep mixing, the small particle that accumulated in the last summer tends to be mixed in all of the place. And when the mixed layer showing, those particles were isolated to the depths. And this mechanism plays a very important role in the mid and high latitude region because the deep winter mixing and the large seasonal changes here. And I think it's worth to mention that we are using the maximum vertical gradient of each chlorophyll profile to define a term named the mixing layer. So it is a bit different from the normal mixed layer, but we believe that it can better represent the depth range of the biological activity. And for the final one, when the eddy formed, the subduction event will deliver the surface particle-rich water to the depths, and it is usually transport the carbon to a very deep layer than the other 2. So in this study, we use negative anomalies of the apparent oxygen utilization and the spice to detect the eddy subduction events. To do this calculation, we are quite relying on the BGC Argo fleet that equipped with a sensor named particulate backscatter. So every time it dives, it will record a profile like this. So this number just represents how many particles are in this water column. And we later can use a linear coefficient to convert it to particulate organic carbon concentration. So for each profile, we have followed Nathan Briggs method to partition it into 3 components. So the black outline, we call that spikes. Those are large particles which used to calculate the gravitational pump. And the red part are small, slow sinking particles, and they were used to calculate the mixed layer pump. And the blue part, just the background noise if come from the instrument. Then we have applied this calculation to all the profile in the source box. So this is the same box we used in the first chapter that is defined based on the idea of a statistical funnel. So that means for a deep sediment trap at the 1,000 meter placed on source here, it is very likely to collect material that exported from the surface within this region. And after that, we just follow the Euler-Course method to estimate the flux of these 3 carbon pumps and to compare it to the sediment traps record. For the float estimates, we plotted the gravitational pump in the first panel and the mixed layer pump in the middle, and the eddy subduction pump in the final one. So the estimates are scattered by the day of that year and color-coded for different floats. And the gravitational pump is maximum from November to January with a magnitude of 400 milligram per square meter per day. And this pump contributes most to the particle export by the strongest magnitude and the longest duration. And we notice that there is a slight increase from April to July. If you still remember the subtropical front south meandering I mentioned in last chapter, that carrying low DIC subtropical water from the north region to the south region. We believe it also carrying more organic carbon particle to the same place, cause this little increase here. So just a little connection between the 2 chapters. And the mixed layer pump is no surprisingly peak around September to October, which agrees well with the seasonal mixing layer shoaling. Despite the duration of it is slightly shorter than the gravitational pump, it can still contribute quite a lot to the carbon export. And we arguing that the BGC Argo is not performing very well to capture the eddy subduction event because it's relative low vertical and temporal resolution. And there are only 2 events observed and estimated in April 2018, and they are transported carbon around a magnitude of 100 milligram per square meter per day. And after that, we just compare the float estimates to the sediment trap flux. Here we term it as FPOC. We added this climatology of FPOC in the first panel. So it can clear to say that the seasonality of it is mainly followed that of the gravitational sinking. So this may suggest the gravitational pump is the most stable and the strongest pathway to export the carbon. For the mixed layer pump, it is particularly strong in 3 years, which are 2015, 2018, and 2021. So we pull out the FPOC record for those 3 years and directly compare. So those estimates are colored by the same color for the flows that occurred in the same year. And in the middle panel, you can see there are slightly increase of FPOC in September, and that is slightly before the active time of the biological gravitational pump, which is started in November. So we believe that this is a nice evidence that the mixed layer pump can contribute to the carbon sequestration in the deep ocean. So as for the eddy subduction pump, it is too rare to understand its annual contribution, but it looks like the eddy subduction pump can contribute a little, contributed this little peak with the mixing layer pump together in 2018 April. Based on the previous thoughts, we have tried to interpolate the POC export in the South region by averaging all the measurements in an annual cycle of 10-day bins. we created this uniformly spaced climatology for the carbon export flux, and we matched the closest FPOC to calculate this transfer efficiency, which in green. So since the eddy subduction is too sporadic to be considered as a regular export pathway, we just decided to ignore in this part. The biological gravitational pump and the mixed layer pump have contributed a flux about 50 grams per square meter per year in the salt's neighborhood. And from the sediment trap flux record, the FPOC at 1,000 meter is about 1.3 gram per square meter per year. So we can get the annual mean transfer efficiency is about 2.6%. So it is quite close to the mean estimates from the Southern Ocean, but a little bit lower than the global mean. So that is probably because the Southern Ocean have a stronger respiration or remineralization rate. And we do notice that the transfer efficiency is quite variable, especially in the first 6 months. We believe that is caused by the quick changes in the float estimates in the upper ocean. Although we didn't detect any obvious time lag and for the major export events in the surface and the deep ocean, the mesopelagic ocean can still act as a buffer zone for mixing and repackaging the settling particles. So this process might not respond quickly for the upper ocean variability. So now we have a number for the organic carbon export from the upper ocean and the number of deep sea sediment trap flux. But how do we know we can trust these two numbers and the relationship will build on based on these two results? We added one more calculation step of the annual net community production, which is ANCP, to test our estimates. Basically, it just calculates from the oxygen consumption in the region below the mixed layer and above 1,000 meter. So follow Su et al. We integrate all the oxygen profiles from the BGC Argo fleet to calculate the oxygen consumption amount in each meter within the source box and use the respiration rate to get the amount of carbon that is required to support this community. So this is a sort of a double check for the POC exports from the second proxy, but based on the same platform. So it turns out that the ANCP estimate is about 50.5 gram carbon per square meter per year. So this number have very well supported our previous results. And we nearly build up an equation here that is the organic carbon export from the upper ocean minus the ANCP consumption in the middle ocean is roughly equal to the sediment trap flux record. Thus, we just quite confident to apply this estimate method to a broader Australian sector of the Subantarctic Zone that is from 135 to 150 degree east, including 1,200 profiles. And we plotted the estimate result in the bar chart here. So the left group is for South region and the right group is for Subantarctic sector. There are too many colors in the bars here, but I guess the most important thing is the organic carbon export and the ANCP, which is colored by light blue and purple respectively. Again, you can see how good they are great in the South region. And in the Subantarctic sector, the gravitational pump and the mixed layer pump export about 45 gram carbon per square meter per year. And the ANCP estimate is about 54 gram per square meter per year. So the ANCP estimate is a little bit higher than the carbon export. So, but they are in quite good agreement. And since we are ignoring the subduction event, we might underestimate the POC export from the upper ocean. So there is one more figure I didn't show here because this talk is quite too long. But the seasonality and the magnitude of these three carbon pumps in the subantarctic sector is very similar to what we have in the South region. So we believe that the South Marine can well represent the border region in terms of the magnitude and the seasonality of carbon export and the consumption of POC in the mesopelagic ocean and also the carbon sequestration in the deep sea. All right, just a quick summary for second chapter. So this is sort of the first study to rigorously combine the estimates of organic carbon exports based on biooptical and oxygen sensor and combine them with a co-located deep sea sediment trap flux. We found the gravitational pump dominates the magnitude and the seasonality of carbon export and the carbon sequestration in the deep ocean. And the mixed layer pump can contribute quite many to export during the seasonal shoaling of the mixed layer. And the BGC Argo is not the best tool to observe or estimate the of the eddy subduction pump. But based on the sporadic exports we have, we believe that their contribution is quite strong and able to deliver particle to a very deep layer with a high transfer efficiency. So this problem can be better addressed by the glider observation. So I think Andy Thompson group in Caltech has observed more obvious and stronger eddy subduction events in the same region in SOTS. The overall transfer efficiency in the SOTS region is about 2 to 3%, and the SOTS marine represents very well for the border and subantarctic zone. All right, I think this is pretty much all I have for this talk, and I like to end this talk by these two key figures and some take-home messages. Well, thanks for your listening, and I'm happy for any questions.
Thanks very much, Xiang. That was really nice.
Thank you.
So maybe I can kick it off with a first question.
Yeah.
So for the sort of strong mixed layer pump events that you saw, was that associated more strongly with like anomalies in the mixed layer depth itself or anomalies in the POC? And what was the sort of time scale of those events?
I think it's more related to the mixed layer depths or mixing layer depths changes. And I think the small particle concentration is quite uniformly in a long time period.
Hmm.
So we do the calculation within a 10-day beam. So I think the time resolution for the BGCR estimates is more like weekly to monthly.
Hmm. Thanks. Other questions? Yep, Sarah.
Yeah, I guess this question of you show what look like really intermittent results for the fluxes, and that does seem challenging to observe from a point measurement or from floats, as you've mentioned. How much do you think you're missing, and what would it take to really capture some of these events, or are they maybe not as intermittent as I think?
Sorry, come again? I didn't
Well,
get the.
it looks like when you showed time series, you have dots that are high for a bit and then low and high for a bit and low, and so it doesn't look like the carbon sequestration is very constant over one season, and that implies challenges in sampling.
Are you talking about this figure here?
That one or your other ones too show that the dots here well, they vary a lot in time. You have a high in April, and then it's low, and then it's high again, low and high.
Yeah. So I think in the gravitational thinking, it is just like very strong in the summer and spring.
Mhm.
So basically, agrees well with the biological primary productivity period. And for the mixing layer, they're just like a peak at the period when the seasonal mix layer showing.
Mhm.
So they are sort of active in a very specific period. And for I didn't get the main idea of the high and lows point you just described. Can you say
I
that
guess
again?
in the MLP events,
Yeah.
um, what I see are a bunch of dots that are non-zero in April, but then June and July or May and June look pretty quiet. And then there are a couple more dots that are non-zero. So it just looks like this is something where maybe you have to be lucky to see an event.
Well, so in September and October, that is a seasonal mixed layer showing. And in April and July, that is basically the time when the subtropical front passing through the South region.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So,
So you think
in
it's more persistent than
yeah. So
I might
it's
fear.
more noisy in the small sauce box because the strong front just like passing through here or it's different with the magnitude is different in year to year. But in the large subantarctic sector, the shape of the mixed layer is more consistent. So basically quiet in those months and very strong in September to October.
Well, one point also that Xiang made in response to my question was that it's really the mixed layer depth anomalies that are the most important in setting the variability in the mixed layer pump, which actually could be good from an observing perspective because the correlation length and timescales for the mixed layer depth fluctuations might be larger than for the actual biology. I mean, I'm not actually sure about that necessarily, but I mean, I would imagine.
It's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely could be seasonal, but there could be storm-driven events too, I suppose.
yeah. I think Andy Thompson's research, they use glider to do a more fine scale observation for the mixing layer variation. And I think the magnitude of their result is very close to the BG's Argo estimates. So I think BG's Argo is doing fine for the mixed layer, but the at subduction is not all right, I guess.
Thank you.
Other questions? I guess one question that I had about the first portion of the talk. So the really clear relationship between SAM and the mixed layer depth, naively you might expect that that would be the explanation for the anomalies in the non-thermal components. So I thought it was really, just because of the deeper mixing driving more entrainment of DAC. So I thought it was a really interesting result, actually, that it was really more a lateral process in the meandering of the fronts. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why you don't see a larger anomaly in the entrainment flux. I mean, I know you don't have subsurface DIC at the mooring, but have you looked, is there just a really weak DIC gradient at the mixed layer base? Or I just would have expected maybe there would be a larger anomaly in the non-thermal PCO2 component that would be associated with those mixed layer depth anomalies.
Well, I think the vertical gradient for the DIC is actually quite strong. But I'm not quite sure why the non-thermal component don't have this correlation results like what the mixed layer have. Probably because the mixed layer is driven by like deepen to the deep ocean, and well, I don't have a very good answer for this.
And then I guess related to that question is just, so you were attributing the non-thermal component anomalies to the frontal meandering and the eddy transport, which I think is a really interesting result. But I was wondering, how do you then link that to the SAM? Or is there some relationship to the SAM in the frontal meandering through a specific mechanism that is known, or is that just a separate story from is SAM what actually matters for this or not?
You mean did SAM influence the frontal location or the eddy activities?
Yeah.
We try to sort of investigate a little bit. We try to use the frontal location to correlate it to SAM or the eddy's number to the SAM index, but we didn't find a very clear relation. but there is one evidence that is we do find the subtropical front is moving to the south like year by year following the global warming trend maybe. But I don't think it's really strongly correlated to SAM, so we just sort of did another kind of separate story.
Yeah.
It's not very related to SAM.
Any other questions? Did you look at all at variations in the amplitude of the PCO2 seasonal cycle and whether that was changing over time? I mean, it didn't really look like it by eye from the full time series, but I know some people have suggested at least that there might be an enhancement in the amplitude of the PCO2 seasonal cycle because of just the increase in atmospheric CO2.
Yeah, we didn't find very clear evidence for the amplified seasonal magnitude, and I think from our MLR model and the in situ data from the SOTS time series, which is Elizabeth's research, we didn't find very sort of the clear evidence that the seasonal amplitude is getting bigger.
Well, I guess maybe that makes sense if the most important thing in driving the overall PCO2 seasonal cycle amplitude is the changes in the amplitude of the non-thermal component that are being linked to this like frontal meandering and eddy activity. So that's not necessarily going to be related to the mechanisms driving that amplification from Peter Landschitzer's work. So
yeah.
but I guess it just shows how much local processes can be the driver of the PCO2 variability at a point location.
Yeah, and I think in the Lanches's paper, the SOTS mooring is located in the sort of between the positive correlation to SAM and the negative correlation to SAM region. So that could be the sort of the explanation why the SAM didn't influence the SOTS region so very strong. And maybe just because the subtropical front is meandering at this specific location.
Maybe another question is that the mooring is located right in one of the main subantarctic mode water formation locations, which means it can likely efficiently subduct anthropogenic CO2 into the ocean interior on timescales that are long enough to be relevant for, climate change. So have you thought at all about whether the mooring data could be leveraged? I mean, I know you only have surface measurements, so it might not be possible, but I was just curious if you'd thought at all about how you could maybe try to take the fluxes here and say something about anthropogenic CO2 subduction.
Well, I don't know much about that, but that could be something to dig in later on.
Great. Well, are there any other final questions? All right, then. Well, let's just thank Xiang very much for a nice presentation. And next month, we'll have Yuming Jin presenting, and there'll be an email about the details for how to register for that. But thanks so much, Xiang. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.